Hello, everybody. We are resuming where we left off last week, and we're going to keep working on our little color picker app here. If you recall, we had this is where we're going to start today, but where we had left off, we had been working on adding, the frame and then a single switch, and then we figured out how to connect it through actions and outlets. Right, that was kind of a new thing for us. And then finally, we wrote a little bit of code to allow us to flip the switch and turn it on and off. And before we actually dig into writing any more stuff, because we're going to pick up now, we're going to add more switches. What we're going to do is we'll get Xcode up on the screen, and we'll go ahead and open up. Well, I guess we should open it up. Sure. It's probably a good thing. And do a dry run of it again. So just to get the engine working, get the simulator up, and all those things. So I'm going to go ahead and do a build and run just to kind of review where we were at, and that's not a bad way to start. So we were, I think we're about halfway through this one. So we'll wait for it to load up. Did it load up in the background here? Yep, it sure did. All right, so there it is. So I'm just waiting for it to propagate inside the simulator. All right, and I think my machine's being a little slow today because I'm also have Visual Studio running in the background, which I probably shouldn't. All right, so I got rid of that, free up a little RAM. But here it is up on the screen. We start with a black box and a switch. The switch starts off. We hit the switch, it turns red, and it turns black. Right, very, very exciting stuff. However, right, for as primitive as this seems, we have done something that's actually powerful, which is we've created, or I should say we didn't create it, but we added a user interface component to the screen that allows for interactivity, and it programmatically does something. It changes something else on the screen by operating it. And it seems to be working fine. So this is we'll call this our clean build. And you can go ahead and you can close your simulator and stop the program from running. And then it does this thing all the time too, right? Where when you're done running, if you have your screen split like this, it always drops you in the app delegate, code, which you don't need. You can just close that, by the way. We are writing all of our code here. And for right now, we don't have a lot of code in here. However, there's still, even with this minimal amount of code, and this is another important takeaway, we can do some pretty powerful stuff with these tools in this language. One of the most important things that we learned in the process of doing this is that we have a combination of what we call IB outlets and IB actions. And those are basically snippets of code that are attached to objects on the screen. So you see here, as I hover over the circle, how it highlights the view. And this one's marked as an outlet, meaning it will put things out, to the audience, so to speak, right? So it's an output, basically. And we have a connection basically made when that circle is filled, the code is connected to the thing. If it's not filled, and we discovered, I think by fumbling around a little bit, right, and having to delete it and recreate it and stuff like that, that can be kind of finicky. I do remember during my own training that, my master instructor that taught me said, sometimes it's like no matter what you do, you just can't get it to connect. Just delete the code and just start over. Just it's just less time consuming to just redo it. And I think the reality of what is happening is there's a kind of like a hidden little software connection that we're not seeing, and if it doesn't register right between the app and the code, it just won't work no matter what you do, right? So sometimes just deleting it is the right thing. The other one is the IB action, and that one is related to a user interface control. And this is just one of many that you can use. And this one provides interactivity for the user. So it does something on the screen. You can touch it and slide it or tap it or whatever the situation happens to be. But because when we trigger the object, we expect something to happen. So the code that we connected to is an IB action function that reacts to the object. And then depending on what we do, it reacts, and we control what it does when we write that code. So that's another takeaway. The other thing that is important to note about this code that we're writing right now, because right now we're lucky it all fits on one screen and we can look at it, is we have this view did load function. And so basically, if you want to equate that to other programming languages, it's kind of like the main method in Java. Nothing will really happen until you put it in here, right? So this is true in a lot of programming languages, that you can write a bunch of code, but it doesn't do anything until you tell it to execute. This is the function that basically tells it to execute, because once the stuff gets up on the screen, then go ahead and do this, is basically what happens in this method or function, if you will. And some of this stuff is kind of will always be there. So like these statements here, and then you'll have the statements that we add. And basically all we're doing when we start up the app is the objects are on the screen, right? That's not done here through code. And then we're just taking that view and making it black, right? And then anything else that happens relies on our interaction. Now, the one interesting thing here is because we are working graphically, are these not creating code, these objects? They sure are, right? So like when you learn to do GUI programming from a code standpoint, where you have to write the code to create the GUI interface, right? And so web developers know this pretty well, because that's how we do HTML, right? We have to write the HTML to make the stuff appear on the screen. And then when we teach GUI programming in Java, it's the same thing, right? We write the code to get the object on the screen, and then we make the object do something. Here, that's kind of it's kind of obscured from us in a sense. It doesn't mean the stuff's not here. It's just not in this file, right? It's not in like one master file. Truth be told, other GUI programming, including Java, has tools that allow you to do the same thing. But that's kind of like a whole another deep dive. So this makes it super easy. My grand point is to get objects on the screen and have them do something without having to worry about coding the object itself. We just drag and drop it, connect it over to an outlet or an action, and start writing code. And it's like very quick and easy, which is why this language is so exciting. Did not used to be this easy, by the way, when you were coding it with straight up Objective-C, which is the root language of this. Where you would have to code out all the components, and then making them do something. And the syntax was much more complicated. So if you ever learn how to do that form of programming, and Jonathan, I know you will, because you will probably be in my Java 2 class coming up, you will for sure get an appreciation for how elegant and simple this is. All right. Now that we're all good with this, I'm going to grab our book. Let's get that up on the screen here. And what we're going to do next, basically, as you can see on the screen here, is we're going to add more switches, right? And right now we have one, it goes from red to black, but ultimately what we're kind of leading to is we're going to do a red, a green, and a blue switch, and we'll be able to toggle all of those colors on and off. And eventually we're going to change those switches from switches to sliders, where we can control the precise amount of each one. That's kind of where we're moving to. And then so basically you can do a complete color mix on the screen, just like you do with a color picker, like, in a piece of software that you might already be familiar with. I have also seen students ramp this up and also include little output boxes where they write down the RGB values so you could copy them if you needed to. And that would be kind of an interesting improvement to this app. But I think the fun part about this is it shows you that conceptually, if you have the idea, you can build this pretty quickly if you're minded that way. All right, let's get this out of the way. Going over screen number 2. Actually, number 1 for me, but whatever. um, get that out of the way, and let's go on to the next sections. All right, so on the main storyboard, there's the next instruction. They want you to select the switch, right? So make sure that's selected. Type Command D to duplicate the switch and drag it underneath the first one using the guides to line them up. So that's the instruction. So what we're learning how to do here is to copy a switch by highlighting it. So on the storyboard, once again, click on the switch and see how I'm highlighted now with the little grabby bars, right? Type Command D and see how it duplicated. Now just grab it and move it, right? Now they got another one made. Command D that one, grab it and move it, right? And now I'm going to suggest that maybe you try to space them so they're kind of even. I'm not sure if mine are perfectly lined up, but you can use those guides, right? And that takes a little bit of practice too, to move them around. But just a real helpful tip when you're moving stuff on the screen, you don't have to use your mouse, by the way. In some regards, like right now, I'm using my keyboard, and I find that with the keyboard, I have much more perfect control, so I get it close with the mouse, and then I can arrow left, right, up, down, and move it 1 pixel at a time exactly to where it needs to be. But you'll notice the guides still work. So I'm going 1 to the left, 1 back to the right, and it still shows me lining up. So if you're doing it with the mouse because, hey, the guides are going to help me, well, they help you with the keyboard too, right? So the guides are there on the keyboard. I like that approach better personally for getting it precise. All right, so now we have 3 switches, and it says open the assistant editor to show view controller, and we already have that up on the screen. So they want this up on the screen, and then control drag from each switch to the code file to create outlets. Now we've done this before, right? So you hold down your control key, take the switch and drag it over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag from the switch, right? Over to here, and we are creating outlets here on these, by the way. And I want you to notice too that so we have to do this with all 3 switches. So all 3 of them will have outlets. So hold down that control key while it's highlighted, click, drag, and you can see how I'm putting them here in the same area as the other outlets. I like to put all the outlets together, and actually there's kind of techniques for this. And one technique that we'll pepper in here in a little while is that there's like a labeling technique that they use here to kind of separate these components. Now that we have these here, we want to label them. So if you notice in the book, it says red switch, green switch, blue switch. So I guess this one will be red. And then once you have that, do the connect. Hopefully the circle fills in. All right. Go on to the next control. Control drag. This one will be green switch. And connect. And one more. And actually what I'm going to do here is add a little space. And this will be blue switch. All right, and they're all successfully connected, and you can confirm that they are by just simply hovering. And I do seem to have a problem with the middle one. I don't know if you guys are catching this, right? But you notice how like I hover over red and red highlights, and I hover over blue and blue highlights, but I hover over green and they all highlight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem, by the way. So the green one is going to be deleted, basically. And we're going to action. Actually, I should probably do it like this. Actually, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna Control Z my way out.
What the heck?
So I'm gonna redo the bottom two again. I'm not sure why that happened, but this is kind of how finicky this is because we're doing it all with mouse movements and control click drags and stuff. Um, so making sure this is highlighted, and let's try that again. So this is green switch. And okay, now that one didn't get a circle. You guys notice this?
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah. So what I'm looking at here now is to make sure that I don't have it. See, I'm looking at like what's happened here, right? So I got red switch. He's got one there. So I'm gonna try this again. Here we go. Control drag. Still don't have it showing the circle. Not really sure why. All right, I'm gonna try something else. Okay, is you guys having the same problem?
Let me see.
Yeah, my circles aren't showing up.
Mine are, but I had originally the same issue as you did, where one color highlighted all of them.
Yeah, and I think what's
Okay.
happened here, see how this one is listed here? Like, see my inspector panel up here? And I have the outlets and green is listed here, and it looks, I mean, as I hover over it, I mean, it's being shown here, and I really don't want it to be. So
Well, I mean,
you see how I got rid of that there? All right, now I'm gonna try that again. I think now it should work.
yeah, mine worked.
Well, Jomar, you must have the magic touch.
I must. Today's a strange day now.
Yeah, this is not still not working for me, but I'm gonna try the blue one and see what's going on with this. This is kind of strange. These are also not working. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fix this. Yeah, and now that now I'm reading the instructions here. Maybe I should have done that before. You know, apparently that behavior I was getting where the middle one was doing all of them was actually correct.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what, in the book has a video and
I'm also noticing something. Sorry,
go ahead.
this might if you look on your storyboard on the left there, once we created those and renamed them, the names stayed even if you delete the code. So I wonder if that's if
Yeah,
that has anything to do with why it's not creating circles anymore, because it was already
yeah,
previously connected and now it's maybe some lingering code is there.
no, Jonathan, you're spot on, and this is kind of the little issue that I was talking about before, where things get referenced in memory and have these little like footprints that we're not seeing. And I think you're correct. I think what the trick is here is that we just get rid of the object and recreate it.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so that okay, and then I'll get rid of this code too. Obviously, that's not going to be helpful. All right, so let's. Okay, so it was what, Command D, and then we'll do Command D again. All right, we have a red switch already. Now we're gonna control drag. Let's see. Boom, right, good catch, sir. Oops. Just didn't do enough control Z's apparently. All right, so there's my red, green, and blue. All right, and they're all connected. And once again, you know, if you do the hovering, right? Trying to get my book back up on screen here. When you hover over these, right, red, green, and blue, and now they're all separate. All right. All right, now they're trying to make some point here too. They have you know, they're basically saying in the sent events area. So like when you use the connections inspector here in the right panel, look in the sense event area, you should see the thing already set there, and we have it already set to switch changed, right? And right now, think about this, when we have this, that's where the connection to all three is coming from. It doesn't really care right now which switch is changed, right? Any switch is changed will flip it from red to black. Not very useful, but if it works, right? All right, so the kind of the point of that panel is it shows, so like if you're on one of these outlets here and you look at the object, I'm trying to click on the object, it shows which one it's linked to, right? And there are ways that you can actually do the connections from here. I'm not a huge fan of that, by the way. All right, so it says, here's the other kind of way that you can connect the actions. It says in the connection inspector, click the X button by the value changed event, which would be this, right? And then disconnect the switch from the action, and then you can find it here in the gutter and then reconnect it. And I'm not asking you guys to do that, right? But I'm just,
thank God.
yeah, right. You know, we finally got it connected. I don't want to sit there and disconnect it now, but there is an alternate way. That's kind of the point. Yeah, and the book makes the point that control dragging is probably the easiest and best way to do it. You know, so it's really kind of a matter, but of what you prefer, but also you should know how to look at that panel to make sure that things are correct. You know, so we didn't do it correct the first time for whatever reason, but now it's right. And all right, so now that we kind of did all that, now we need to kind of change some of our code to make it kind of do stuff that makes a little bit more sense. And what would make sense is to have a function that understands which switch we're using and then change the color according to that, right? But we need to set up a little bit of logic to do that. Yeah, and they're making the point here. There's already some repeated code in the file. The color is set to black. And okay, so you know, I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to do a run on this. So let's see what happens with a run. More out of curiosity than anything else. All right, let's let it load up. All right, so I flip the switch, it still works, but all of them work, right? So yeah, that's kind of an interesting effect. Not what we want at all, right? But we do have three controls on the screen. All right. So now the next thing that we're going to build is a function that we're then going to call basically to allow us to differentiate three switches. So let's do that. We're going to create a function, and I'm going to put my functions down here. And that tends
Bless you.
thank you. That tends to be kind of the pattern that people code in when they do this. So they tend to put all their outlets and actions in the same area, usually towards the top. Viewed loads usually somewhere like in the middle, and then the functions that we access will usually be towards the bottom of the code. Some of the reason for that, if you're curious, okay, why are we putting these interface controls and stuff, the outlets and actions at the top? And the answer for that is basically, when you write a GUI program, you want the components to load up on the screen before the users can interface with them, right? So if the code is operating sequentially from top to bottom, don't you want the thing to appear first and the connection to be made first before they start interacting? That's kind of the why. All right, so let's start building this function. It shouldn't take too much time. There is sample code in the book if you're following along in the book. And I'm going to call this one update color. So there's my parentheses, and here's my curly brackets. And let's scroll down a little bit. We're going to set up 3 variables, red. And then I want you to pay attention here to this technique, because we are setting a CG float. Basically, they put in a floating point value to determine the color, right? We're presetting it to 0. We're going to do the same thing with green and blue. So you can just go ahead and code those. Green : CG float equals 0. And then another variable, blue, also 0. All right, so there's our variables. Now we're going to have a series of 3 if statements. And because these switches have a bunch of properties that travel with them. So in other words, any user interface component will have like a regular object or a class or something. It will have data properties. It will have methods and actions associated to it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say with red switch, and then we're using a dot, we're checking to see, is it on? And see, that's one of the first one that pops up on the list. So this is just to check, is it flipped on? That's what we're asking. If it is, red equal to 1. On for red. We're going to do the same thing with green. There's no else's here. These are just ifs, right? So if green switch dot is on, and green equals 1. Do an if for blue. If blue switch is on, then blue equals 1. 3 if statements. All right. Just a little bit more code here to finish it up. We're going to put in a constant here. So we're going to say let color equal UI color. And then from here, we're going to pick, see how it kind of like auto suggests here. And we are going to take exactly its suggestion because it's realizing which colors we're using, right? But it's not just about that. So the way that this lays out really is we are going to, depending on the position of the switch, either being on or off, we're including red, green, and blue, or we're not. And UI color is a system function that basically takes the value that we set for a color, applies it to the color mixer. The values go from 0 to 1, by the way, right, to cover the whole color range. And then you just include them here as numbers. And alpha, if you're wondering what that 4th thing is, alpha is equivalent to opacity in color selection, right? So how see-through it is. Generally speaking, we're going to leave that at 1. We don't want the colors to be see-through at this point, but keep in mind that you could make something see-through using this approach. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say red is red. No, or really what we're telling it is we're going to feed in the variable. It's either 1 or 0, depending on that statement. And then whatever the value is currently, so it's going to receive a 1 or a 0 and then do the mix. The alpha, however, we're just going to set manually to 1. Right. More info than you want to know about color mixing, probably. Right. And we're going to take our color view, which is the box that receives everything, and now we're going to change the background color of it, not to something that's predetermined, but the color that was just mixed above, right? So the switch is turning on and off, and then the color is going to dynamically adjust, right? Depending on how we flip the switches. All right. So that's good that we did that, but now we have to do a little bit of tweaking to make this function work. So it says to update the action method to call this new function, remove the code that was setting the color and replace it with the single line update color, right? So which one was changing the color, right? It was the switch changed function, right? So what we're going to do here is move all this. So we're going to delete that. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, so we need to put it in both spots. I'm just trying to understand the author's instructions here, but that makes sense. So we're going to replace those lines with update color. But you know what? We're also going to do that here. So we update color in both spots. So when it loads up, all 3 switches will be off, and it should be black. We'll see. All right, let's see what happens with this. Let's run it. Looks like I was still running it, so I'm going to stop it and restart it. All right, so it still comes up black because that's what we told it to do. And now I'm going to hit each switch. There's red, there's green, and there's blue. And if I hit more than one, I get a color mix. Isn't that interesting? When you turn on all 3, it turns white. That's exactly what it's supposed to do, by the way. Kind of interesting how that works, right? So it shows you like the 3 primary screen colors and how by flipping those in various combinations, you can basically get any color on the color wheel that's in the primary range, basically, or the tertiary range, or the secondary, primary and secondary colors by just flipping these switches, basically. All right. Are you guys getting yours to work?
I have a massive error. I wrote everything as you did, but
Mine's
Well,
working.
All right. Well, Jomar, I'll pause the recording here for a second and let's take a look.
all right.
Okay, our next step, now that we have this all fancy working here, right, which is really empowering, I guess, or whatever. I'm going to stop this though. Is we are going to add sliders to the app to give it a little bit more control overall. So I am trying to arrange my screen here. If you guys are noticing, I'm using my trackpad to do it, just to get the storyboard a little bit more visible here. And as we start to add more code, I'm going to start prioritizing the code more than you know, the storyboard. But you can also do this too, right? So you can go to this view. And this is just recommended. I have my simulator, so I can just click on it right here in the background. So it's ready to go. All right. Now, we're going to do some interesting steps here, and we're going to select all 3 of these switches at once. So we're going to You can hold down your shift key to do this, right? So you can shift click and then select all three. You can also click, drag, and highlight all three. That works too, right? All right. Now, the reason we're doing this is they want us to slide these over to the left. So they don't want them in the middle of the screen anymore. We're going to move them like maybe over here. And I'm just going to go with the guide. The guide's saying that's a good spot. I'm going with it. So I just slid them all over to the left. Okay, next, you want to click off of those so they deselect and select only the top switch. And then this is what they're suggesting to say, select the top switch and then hold down the shift key and press the up arrow key 4 times. You know, to basically slide it up, and then take the bottom switch, hold down shift and hold it, press down 4 times. And I think I did 4. There we go. Oh, that's one too many. We're just creating a little bit of space. You could do this with the mouse too, right? But if you're wondering why you're holding down the shift key forces you to stay perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal, right? So you're not straying 1 pixel over to the left or right. I mean, you can get it back with the guides, right? Not a big deal, right? All right, so right now they're making a point. They're asking the question, why add more space between the switches? So this is something we don't think about. But when we're using stuff, we're on a screen like this, we have a mouse in our hands. A mouse has got really fine pointer control. But when we're on a phone and the screen is small and your fingers are fat like mine, you know, maybe you have gloves on, or who knows, right? Those controls don't always really work well when they're really close together. They're suggesting that you split them apart a little bit just to give your user more space to work with. And it's really a very wise suggestion. And this is often not thought about very carefully in some apps. And I don't know if you guys have ever used an app where it's like, man, this, like, I can't really get my finger on that button, you know, and I've had that experience a few times, you know. It could just be me though, by the way. So now we're going to add sliders. So this will be new for us. I am going to make sure that I click off of all these objects here before I do it. So we're going to come up here and hit the little plus sign up in the menu bar here. And now we're going to look for a slider. Now you can just do a search. So you can just type slider. There's only one slider available. And just grab it, drag it on, and then try to align it as best you can with the switch. Now, you will be able to align it and stretch it and make it wider. My recommendation on the slider is to make it wider than what it sits by default. But we're going to do this a few different times here. So let's do that again. So I can just keep pulling it from the object library if I want. I could also do the Command D. Either way, doesn't really matter too much. And then you can use your guides to align them to the top, the middle. I think the middle is probably wise. It takes that middle one, I feel, is a little hard to hit. The
It
other
is.
thing that I'm, go ahead.
No, it is. It's hard.
Okay. Well, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a command click and get all 3 of them selected. And then I'm also going to make them. Okay. So I guess they don't all resize together, but I'm going to make mine a little bit wider in both directions. And right now my magic mouse is fighting me a little bit. It's being a little too magical. Right. And I'm sure as you guys look at this, you'll probably go, oh, I would do it like this, or I would make it bigger, or I would make it smaller, but, you know, do what you will, you know, but kind of make it look like this, you know, doesn't have to be precise. Just about. All right. So now we're going to take all three of these and highlight them. So you see how I'm just dragging around them to get them all selected. And then it says in the attributes inspector, which is over here, right? This is the attributes inspector. I always forget the names of them. And by the way, if you guys ever sit for the Apple certification, a big part of the certification is knowing the names of all the stuff on the screen. And
Ugh.
I've done the class twice now. Now I'm teaching it and I still don't know the names. So don't feel bad if you don't memorize them. You can just hover like I did. But this is the attributes inspector. It says in the attributes inspector, set value to 1. You can just type it in actually. And then once you've typed it in, you can hit tab. And it says, notice that, okay, so in other words, what they're asking us for here really is what's the top range value for this slider. And if you look at the two fields that follow value, there's a minimum and a maximum. And right now that goes from 0 to 1.5 for the slider. So in other words, when I move the slider, the value that it's generating numerically by its position is going to be in that range, right? And they want us to adjust it, I think. And I'm trying to look at their little graphic here. Yeah. So what they want us to do is basically take that maximum one and set it to 1 and see. All right, see how that changed my value though. So now I'm gonna adjust that to 1. So basically, like in the color in the code, we can basically designate color by selecting a value between 0 and 1 as a floating point number. We're setting the slider to correspond to that. So at the lowest, it'll be 0, and at the top end, it'll be 1. We're setting the maximum and the minimum, and then we're presetting the value to 1. Right. All right. So now we have the interesting task of connecting outlets and actions. And it says, make sure you have your code window open, which we do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to control drag from each slider to create outlets for each slider. And then we're going to name each one red slider, green slider, blue slider, right? Kind of a something we're already sort of familiar with. So what I'm going to do preemptively here is I'm going to create a little space here in my code to accommodate for those. I'm going to make sure I'm not selected to all of them, but I am going to control drag one at a time. We're adding an outlet. This is going to be red slider. Once again, we're looking for those circles. Green. And then finally, blue slider. Now, these all have, lines in between them in the code, by the way. If you want to condense them down and there's no spaces in between, that's fine. If that looks better to you, that's probably what I would do. Is if I was like, typing a bunch of code, I would try to condense it down as much as I could. But it looks like all three of them worked and all the connections were made. Let's move on to the next page here. All right. Now we need to do the action of connecting these sliders to actions. So we created outlets, right? And now we're going to create actions to go with. So the actions will all kind of be bundled together. We have one here for switch changed, where it's updating the color. And I don't know if I'll put mine maybe above switch changed or below. I think I'm going to put them below. I don't think it really matters too much, but it's going to be in the same area with the other action. So we're going to be working from here to here because these already have outlets set. When we control drag here, um, from the slider down to the code, we're going to create one that is going to be called slider changed. Let me try doing the maneuver here so you can see how it's done. Right. It automatically recognizes there's already an outlet, so it's switching over to action as an object. And we want to name this, and we're going to call it slider. All the other stuff is fine. The one question that often arose during training is like, do we want to choose any or do we want to choose UI slider? And our instructor always says any is fine. You know, typically that's what he would tell us. And then let's go ahead and do a connect and make sure that it worked. All right. So we want to do that with each of the sliders. And just be real systematic about it. So I'm actually cancel that. I'm doing this backwards here. I want you to think about this for a second, and I'm trying to think about it myself. Is I'm reading the instruction and not reading it right. It says drag from the circle icon in the gutter by the new action to each of the other two sliders. So we're going to go the other direction. So in other words, from this circle icon, I'm going to drag to this slider. Right. And then I'm going to have to come over here to verify that that is actually connecting. Okay, so the red slider is connected. The green slider is connected and the blue slider is connected. So you see that this is how we verify that. Oh, and I just totally screwed this up, didn't I? All right. I'm control Zing that, you guys. Uh-oh. All right, so now you heard my uh-ohs here, right?
Yeah.
I'm control Zing and it's control Zing stuff I don't want to undo. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually blow this away. We're probably going to run into the same problem we did last time. My blue one is now not connected, so I'm going to try to reconnect it. I think I'm okay. Did you guys see how I did that? I went the other direction. I just click dragged from here to the blue slider and it reconnected. All right. And hopefully that's okay. Now I'm a little paranoid about it, frankly. So I'm going to look at, click on the switch, go here, blue slider is connected. Green slider's connected, red slider's connected. I'm going to do this action one more time. So I'm kind of repeating all these steps again, because what I was doing accidentally is I was connecting the switch changed to the sliders, which is connected to these switches. That's not what I want, right? You guys catching me? So my bad on that. So maybe I should be smart then. And maybe if I add that new action, I'll add it here as opposed to adding it below, because that clearly confused me. So let me try that again. So we're going to take the top slider and control drag and create an action. So okay, now it's trying to do an outlet again, which is not good. Let's try that one more time. So it's my green slider not connected. Blue, green, red. Yeah, I'm gonna manually switch this to an action. It's not picking up that it should be an action, so I'm forcing it. All right, so we're gonna call this slider changed, spelled correctly. Right, that helps. And there's my function. All right, so we're okay there. Now we're going to go the other direction. So we're going to be in the code here. And now we're going to click and drag over to each one of the other sliders So I'm gonna go like this, green slider. Then I'm gonna go like this and go to the blue slider. And now when I hover over the circle, all three should highlight. All right. Now, we just created a new action method here. And what I'm going to do is we want to basically have it update the color. So inside here, we're just going to call that same function. We're going to call update color.
Mine didn't work.
Okay. Let's pause for a second and take a look, Jomar.
Okay.
All right, so we were able to fix the problem that we ran into, but these actions are a little bit finicky. And I think one of the tricks that we learned is when we were kind of back dragging on these back the other direction, make sure that nothing is selected first before you do the back drag. That was kind of the trick, right? And when we had deselected the first slider, then I could, kind of bring that back over. And then you should be able to double check that it's good, because this function will affect all three sliders, like this function affects all three switches, right? What you need to put inside that slider changed function is the update color, right? And then the other thing to think about here is, it says it currently, it sets the value of each color component to 1 if the switch is on. That's how the switches work. And what we're going to need to do is figure out now what the value of each slider is on the range to react to that value, right? So we're going to have to interpolate the screen position with a numeric value so that we can send it back to the color mixer to give us the corresponding color. So we get, instead of like red, green, blue mixes, we'll get very finite control. All right, so I'm trying to figure out where we have to add this code. So it says update each line so it uses the value of the corresponding slider instead. This is the example for the red switch. Follow the same pattern to update the other two switches. All right. We got to go down here basically. So we're going to change the update color function. And if the red switch is on, instead of just being full on red, we're going to replace the one with CG float, and then in parentheses here, the red slider dot value. And then of course, you're going to make the same change here. So CG float, parens, and this is going to be the green slider dot value. By the way, the value on these is automatically grabbed, right? Just by the physics of the object, basically. The wider you make the slider, the more precision it will have. I think that's kind of intuitive, but perhaps not. If you're looking to get really precise colors, make that slider really wide. And you can change that at any time, by the way. All right. I think we're good to run. Let's give this a shot. All right. I'm going to hit the run button. It's propagating into the simulator there. And you can see right now, the switches are off. If I flip the switch, and then I can change the amount of red. Pretty fancy, right? Flip on blue. And now I can actually start to create interesting colors, and it's pretty subtle in a lot of cases, but really almost, it's not infinite technically. I think we have a color palette of like 64 million colors or something we can generate doing this, which is kind of a crazy thought, but you can certainly flip the switch to turn off the slider and then mix it to whatever level you would like, right? Now, all right. One other thing that we probably want to think about adding to this, I mean, this is kind of a success already. I don't know if you guys are feeling it, right? Because here we are with some very simple controls, simple connections, and we have kind of a fancy little color mixer. But what might be kind of nice to put on here is to do a reset, and that's the next part of this, to add a reset button. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's stop the simulator from running and let's go back into our storyboard here. And we're gonna
I'm actually having an issue. Mine isn't going. I think I may have missed some code here. What did we add after we changed the if statement, the if statements? We changed the like red to red slider dot value and
Yep.
then green slide. We did
Yeah,
those
you did
three.
all
and
three of
then-
them, right? That was all that changed here, right? But you
Okay.
also have to call the function from slider changed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm
Okay.
missing.
Yeah, if that's not there, it won't react. But I think that's really kind of fascinating is it basically anytime you move that slider at all, it's even one tiny little tidbit, it calls the function to read the value from the slider to update the color. It's like live and interactive, which is kind of awesome.
Okay, now we're working. Thank you.
All right, so now let's go ahead and try to add a button here, and we just simply go up to the library here and we can just type button. And it says no matches. How is that? Oh, let's make sure we're on the storyboard. There we go. Right. So I was on the code and I'm trying to add stuff and it's trying to add code components and not user interface components. So it's kind of an interesting little hack there too, right? So if you're in the code, there's the code snippets you can add with that panel. All right, so let's go ahead and take that button and drop it kind of on somewhere near the bottom of the screen. And then in the attributes inspector, you can come over here and you can change the name of the button from button to reset. See it change. Now it is possible, by the way, you can also, if you're in the button here, you can actually double click the button itself and change it directly. So that's possible. You don't have to change it from that panel. Right. And if you want, you could hypothetically style this to your heart's content. I'm not sure how necessary that would be. All right, so now we're going to add another action here. So we're going to drag from this button now over, or control drag, right? So make sure you're highlighted, then control drag, and we're adding another action. Mine doesn't seem to want to work. There we go. It's picking up the fact that it's an action. They want us to call it reset. All right, so what we're going to want to do here now, think about like what the reset would do, right? If we were to reset this app, we would want to turn all of the switches off, right? And maybe even readjust their position. And I'm looking here that they have a sample of the code, but they're basically saying your reset button will have a value of each slider. Set this value of each slider to 1 and the is on property of each switch to false. So let's do that. And if you guys remember how we did that before, here we're checking the status. but that's kind of the syntax. So for example, I'm just going to copy this one and I'm going to come up here to the reset and I'm just going to say red switch is on equals false. Of course, blue switch or green switch, so we go red, green, blue, right? Dot is on equals false, and then blue switch dot is on equals false. And now we're going to set the sliders. So we're going to set red slider dot value. We were told to set it to 1. Let's type it. Succeeding. And just follow the pattern. Green slider dot value 1. Blue dot value equals 1. So in other words, when we hit this button, it's going to do all of these actions, right? If you want, I'm going to like start tidying up my code here a little bit because I know we're near the end, just to kind of condense it all down. And that way, when I do like the closing screenshot or whatever, it's all nice and concise. So switch changed, reset, right? Trigger all of these actions at once. Right. One last little thing. It says we've updated the sliders using code, but you want the same behavior as if the user had changed the switches. When the user changes, it's button is tabbed. Add a call to update color at the end of the action method. So in other words, we just flipped all these switches, but we didn't update the color. So we update the color. So if they hit reset, set those all to false, set all the sliders to 1, and then update the color. Makes sense. All right, let's give this a try because I think we are just about done with this one. Here's the run. Here's the app on the screen. Let's flip the switches on. I'll turn on all of them and kind of mix some sort of color I like here a little bit. Apparently I'm partial to purples, I guess. I always have been, I don't know why.
Oh, whoa.
Probably listening to too much Black Sabbath as a kid or something.
Oh, oops. I messed up.
So their second or third album, Master of Reality, had that like purple font on it. Beautiful guitar tone that I've always tried to emulate. And there it is. There's my purple. All right, let's try the reset and see if it does it. All right, all the switches are off. All the sliders are up to 1. And then you can turn them back on and try again. All right, so I mean, this is pretty much the culmination of this app. If you were thinking of like maybe possible adjustments or enhancements to this, and like I said, when I was doing my training, I had a couple people that, like myself, had done it before and got bored. And what they did is they went down here, and whenever the CG float value of that slider was set to a certain number, they would grab that number as text and then put it back up on the screen to show people what the RGB values are in terms of numbers. So I mean, and there's a little numeric conversion that happens, but I'm just kind of giving you that thought, because if you compare it to like a professional color mixer, that's one of the other byproducts of it is you change the color, but then you also get the RGB code so you can drop it into your app or whatever. Not really a big concern for this. Our big thing is just getting all the controls to work, learning how do we connect things, creating outlets and actions, learning about all the different aspects here that are brand new. This is kind of a cool little app. And I don't know why you would ever want to use it aside from being like a web developer dialing up a color or an artist, right? And if you were really intent on having your own little color picker app, you could think about making those conversions to text. I think it would be kind of a neat little feature. All right, I'm going to stop that from running. I think we're at the point now where we're, you know, probably needing a break, but we're also going to come back and clean up the interface a little bit and add a couple little bells and whistles to it to make it sparkle a little bit more. Let's take a 5-minute break though. In fact, actually, could we take a 10-minute break if that's all
Yeah,
right?
that works for me.
Yeah.
I have to get
And I'll see
little
you
something
guys.
to eat.
Let's see. Let's call it like 10 after 11. I think would be a good time.
Okay, sounds good.
See you then.
All right.
All right, we are back from our break and we're going to move on now, and we're actively going to be working on part 6 of the app build, which is cleaning up the interface and basically just making it look a little nicer. And this is really kind of more of a a deep dive on like some of the controls that we haven't really played with, you know, as far as tools go up on the screen. I'm not sure if our faces just recorded into the video or not. So if they did, I apologize. I'm sure you guys probably don't care too much, but I don't always like to look at my face, you know, when I'm recording stuff. Plus it hides part of the screen, you know, I kind of have an issue with that. So, all right, let's kind of dig in here. And basically what our goals are here, and I'm reading right from the beginning of part 6, that all the switches and sliders right now look the same, right? There's no way to tell basically which control you're operating. So in other words, the red switch looks like the green switch looks like the blue switch, right? Wouldn't it be helpful if each switch was colored according to what color it was? And just to kind of demonstrate this, let me just run it really quick. Like right now, the sliders all have a blue mark. Wouldn't it be better if the red slider had red and the green slider had green and the blue slider had blue, and the same with the switches, right? Like if these were colored with the same color. So we're going to figure out how to do that. Now, the interesting thing about that, you know, the color has like basically 2 different settings here for the switches, and you'll notice the on tint color and the thumb tint color. So these 2 aspects of colors of those switches can be independently controlled. That's the goal here. Now, in order to set these, let's go ahead and kill this app from running. It's going to take a couple little actions here, and let's see if we can kind of adjust our storyboard a little bit here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go one by one on these switches. We're going to start with the switches. So in the interface, click on the switch, and then we're going to want to change here the on tint value over here, right? All right, it's the red, it's the first one that we want to change. I think leaving the switch white is probably helpful. Like we wouldn't want to make the switch the same color as the on tint color in the background, because then you wouldn't be able to really see it. So you can come up here and click, and you can see we have a really big selection of colors, but we want to use the red or the system red color, right? Now, of course, we're not seeing that because the switch is turned off right now. We're just going to take it on faith that it's working. Do the same thing for the other 2 switches if you haven't figured that out yet. So select the switch, come over here to the attributes inspector, click the on tint, and then for the green, we want the system green color. And then finally for the blue switch, on tint, the system blue, whatever that is, way up here. Okay, so there it is. All 3 of those are now set. All right. Now we're going to start tinting the sliders, and the sliders kind of have the same little stipulation. They have basically, if you click on one of them, let's just click on the first one, and they have basically 3 different color settings for the slider. So it's, if you slide the thing all the way to the right, what's the slider color on what's to the left? what's the slider color for what's to the right of the slider, and then what color is the slider itself. So the thumb tint is the button on the slider. Then you have the min track and the max track. The min track is on the left, the max track is on the right. And I'm not sure how they really prefer us to do it, but I think that what would be wise here is to set the min track to blue. And I don't think we need to set the max track, because if you think about it, it's like we're adding more blue or adding more red. Doesn't matter what's on the right, you know, but you can see like what color it is. So let's try doing that. So hit the slider. The first one is red. We're going to go to the min track. We're going to find system red. Next slider, min track will be system green. And then the blue slider, system blue, which I've now learned is way up at the top of the list. Right. And so basically what we're doing here is, instead of like putting a little, you know, text label under each thing saying red slider, green slider, blue slider, so they know what they're doing, we're just coloring it what it is so they know what they're mixing, right? And I think that's really kind of a clever but simple little technique. We're also going to add a border to the color view. So this box up here right now is just a plain old box. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but if you take all the sliders and you flip them all the way to the right and it turns white, you can't even see the box, right? So maybe having a border on it would be kind of nice, right? It would make it a lot easier to kind of do that. Now, we want that border to just like happen right when the app loads. So what we're going to do is we're going to put code for it here inside of view did load, and we're going to add the following line. So if you guys want to follow along, so I'm going to call the color view, that's the box, and then we're going to address the layer, and then we're going to set basically the border width, a radius for the corner, and a border color. And then we're also going to set the background color to black, basically. Well, actually, the border color to black. I said background, but I meant border. Okay, so let's just do those one at a time. So first, let's start with the border width. And so for those of you that are web developers, by the way, this is kind of like, you know, playing with like CSS sort of, right? You know, same kind of concepts. And a lot of this stuff kind of stems from, you know, the graphics world, you know, the terminology. So it's kind of consistent in these kind of technology areas. Yeah, we are doing a what we call a corner radius here. In web, we'd call this just a, what would we call this? Border.
Border radius.
Yeah, I think it is border radius, not corner radius. It's a real similar, but the same basic kind of thing. And that's how many pixels the radius of the turn is, right? And it just makes it look a little slicker, basically. So the last one that we're going to add here is color view, layer, border color. And here we're going to type in UI color, and we're going to do a CG color. So I may as well just do it like that. And black. Now, oh, I see. So they're doing a little bit differently here in the book. So this is how I would do it, but and I'm pretty sure that this will work, but it doesn't like it apparently. So that apparently is not going to work. We're going to do it like this. So UI color dot black dot CG color. That's how they want us to do it. And then that does take care of the error. Right. So following the auto type on that one was not wise. Another thing to think about is, as we're kind of using the apps, you want, and they're making this point here, that you want to prevent each slider from working when the switch isn't turned on, right? So all the controls have a property called is enabled that allows the control to be activated or deactivated. Okay, all right, so let's just click on one of these. Somewhere here, there's an is enabled right here. So see how it's enabled, right? And that's just a property with a switch. And by default, they're enabled. Or like, why would you put it on the screen if it's not enabled? You know, it's kind of the thinking. But there are times in an app where you don't want to let people click or use a control depending on what's happening in the app, right? And so what their point is if the switch is off, the slider should be disabled, right? If the slider is enabled, then the switch should be on, right? So if you're following the logic there, you know. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a function for that. So let's do that. Let's create a func, and we're going to call it update controls. Within your parens and your curlies, and then we're just going to write some simple code here to kind of make this happen. So the first, we're going to focus on the slider aspect. So we're going to say when the slider is enabled, that the red switch is on. You see how kind of neat it is with the properties and how quickly they pop up like this. This is a repeating thing, of course, as you would anticipate. So you just do the same for all the others.
What the heck?
Blue. Slider. That's enabled. And that's the code. This has to be called whenever a switch is changed, right? So we want to put it inside the switch changed action and call this function, right? So if you got that code, I'm going to scroll past this. So we're going to go back up here to the switch change. So we're going to update color. And we're going to update controls every time the switch is changed. One other thing we need to do here, it says we need to then add a call from the view did load so that the sliders are disabled correctly when the amp first launches. So basically, we're going to add a call from reset, basically. All right, so let me see if I can figure out how to do this. All right, so view did load. So we're going to do, I'm not sure if this should go at the top or the bottom. I don't think it really matters too much. We're going to update controls. And then we also want to do that whenever somebody hits reset, we want to do the same thing. We want to lock those switches. So let's one here. So view did load, we'll call it right when it starts to make sure we're in the right state. And then every time they hit the reset button, it'll put it back, right? That makes sense. All right. Now, let's go ahead and run this. The proof is in the pudding here. So let's see it work. So here it comes up on the screen. And if you're looking at this now, you'll notice that the things are colored, right? The sliders are colored, but I cannot move them. Right? I hit the switch, the color becomes a little, with the switch turns on, and then I can move it. Notice the border around, the view window. Right, all of them seem to be working. We'll do a reset, puts it back, and it seems like we're okay. Right, so all the things are working correctly. Now, prior to this, right, we could have used the sliders without the switches, right? That was kind of the point. All right, so that's kind of the wrap on this app, folks. And if you were to like do anything else to kind of customize it, I mean, you could do lots of stuff, right? I mean, you could kind of use your imagination. You could put a whole background image in here. You could make the button look better. You could do what I suggested, which is you could show like the RGB values as text here if you wanted to be really ambitious or whatever. Not really necessary, but I think it's kind of a fun little app. We learned a lot about how apps operate with this one, much more so than the things that we've done previously, I think. And that is because we're adding the user interface controls, and a really big part of app building is exactly that. It's like the stuff you touch on the screen or slide or pinch or zoom or whatever, right? All of those things, and you can code for all of it. All right, so I'm gonna end this recording here. So that's a complete app build of the color picker or whatever we called it. I forget what we called it, honestly, but whatever. So we'll call that a wrap.